This is DateLine with CFJ. Breaking headline news with a little snark thrown in. DateLine, Los Angeles. President Barack Obama, otherwise known as the fundraiser-in-chief, made life miserable for Angelenos last week. No, it wasn't his disastrous economic policies that have made everyone in America miserable. It was his motorcade, or as he likes to call it, the Royal Procession. Obama's running around La La Land has the locals fuming as main arteries during rush hour were closed. One-way streets turned backwards to accommodate His Highness as he goes from fundraiser to fundraiser with the last remnants of the sycophants in Hollywood. Public outrage hit a boiling point when a woman in labor was not allowed to cross the street to Cedars-Sinai Hospital to give birth. Once the president passed and they finished picking up the rose petals, the woman walked across the street in between contractions and gave birth. The strange thing about the birth was that as soon as a child was born, the little tyke gave the same reaction liberals give when you point out Obama's horrible record as president. Of course, the White House spokesman and the liberal media started singing a chorus as to whose fault it really was that the pregnant woman was delayed in getting to Cedars-Sinai.
It's Bush's fault. It's Bush's fault. It's Bush's fault.
DateLine, the District of Columbia. The non-voting congressional delegate for the District of Columbia, Eleanor Holmes Norton, in a tirade during a congressional hearing this last Friday, screamed that the White House should not be held up to scrutiny, saying there was no right to know what was going on behind closed doors.
You don't have a right to know everything in a separation of powers government, my friend. That is the difference between a parliamentary government and a separation of powers government.
Unfortunately for the people of D.C. that she represents, not only is she clueless about what the separation of powers really means, but she couldn't be more wrong. A constitutional government with three separate branches of government means that each of the three branches would have defined abilities to check the powers of the other branches. This idea was called separation of powers. This United States form of separation of powers is associated with a system of checks and balances. So it just so happens that the separation of powers actually does mean that the other branches, like the Congress, has a duty to see what the White House is doing behind closed doors. Of course, the crooked Representative Elijah Cummings, a Democrat from Maryland, who, unlike Holmes Norton, does get a vote, and is the top-ranking Democrat in the Oversight Committee, thanked Holmes for her comments, and he said, quote, "I associate myself with your comments," unquote, thus making it clear that he doesn't believe the public has the right to know what is going on inside the White House either. Of course, this comment, while as dumb as the D.C. rep, must be taken with a grain of salt. He also doesn't want people looking into what he has done either. He was caught committing a felony by illegally procuring confidential tax documents of a Tea Party group from fellow felon Lois Take the Fifth Lerner. DateLine, reality. The environmentals have had a blistering summer of bad news for their cause of global warming. It's just the rest of us in reality that are experiencing the coolest summer on record. The way they have come to the conclusion of this phenomenon is by studying the frequency of 90-degree days in the U.S. The frequency of these days has been plummeting for 80 years, and this summer has had the lowest frequency of 90-degree days through July 23rd. On record. While only the Looney Tunes on the left, which by the way includes our President and Secretary of State John Kerry, are past delusional on believing the myth of global warming, I have one question for the mentals I mean the environmentals, with all the mounting evidence that the globe has been cooling for decades, when will you guys join us in reality by pulling your heads out? DateLine. Tripoli, Libya. Almost 2 years after stranding 4 Americans, including its ambassador, to die in Benghazi, at the slightest whiff of danger, this administration evacuated all personnel from the American embassy in Tripoli just last week. This action not only acts as an admission for its criminal abandonment in Benghazi, as in that case there were al-Qaeda flags flying in the same neighborhood as our consulate and they did not evacuate, which led to the first ambassador to be killed at his post since 1979. But this evacuation also tells a story of another disastrous Obama foreign policy. With Hamas shooting thousands of rockets into Israel and even violating its own ceasefire agreement, civilian planes being shot down in Ukraine by Russian separatists with guns supplied and most likely operated by Russian soldiers, ISIS gearing up for a siege on Baghdad, a humanitarian crisis on our southern border not seen since the Cuban boat lift under Carter, even the former Secretary of State under a Democrat president, Madeleine Albright, said this week, quote, "The world is a mess," unquote. With the bug out of our embassy in Libya, one might ask White House spokesman Josh Earnest if this is what he meant when he said just last week,
I think that there have been a number of situations in which you've seen this administration intervene in a meaningful way that has since substantially improved the tranquility of the global community.
Say what?
The tranquility of the global community.
You're an idiot.
DateLine. Hollywood. As President Barack Obama's approval rating plummets and the number of Americans that want him to be impeached rises, celebrity sycophants are becoming unhinged as their liberal icon becomes a tale of epic failure. During a segment on TMZ, a Hollywood trash network, they did a story on Tea Party favorite Sarah Palin getting a speeding ticket. After showing Palin's response, quote, "I wasn't speeding, I was qualifying," unquote, one staff member out of nowhere shouted, "She's a bitch." Another added in the attack, "She's a real bad mom," while someone else said, "She's a horrible mom." A third finished the multi-pronged attack by saying, "She's not evil, she's too dumb to be good or evil," unquote. So TMZ and in general La La Land Obama bootlickers think she is dumb. Back in 2008, she predicted that Putin would invade neighboring Ukraine like Russia did just a few months ago. Even with all the intelligence apparatuses at his disposal, the genius Barack Obama didn't see it coming until the tanks actually crossed the border. So TMZ, if Palin is dumb, what would you call the president?
You're a moron!
DateLine. The White House. After taking office in 2009, President Barack Obama announced that his administration was going to be the most transparent in history.
Say what?
That's what you say now, as even the liberal press has called it the most secretive in recent memory. But just this week, the Obama administration has hit a new low. Top White House political advisor David Seamus refused again Friday to adhere to a congressional subpoena. This is nothing new for this lawless administration, as they have the only cabinet member in the history of the United States to be held in contempt of Congress for illegally refusing subpoenas, as well as lying under oath. As some of you might not know, this is none other than the country's top law enforcement agent, Attorney General Eric Holder, who shamelessly still has his job. But as most of you know, President Obama's claims and promises do have expiration dates. So let's ask old 2009 President Obama what he thinks of today's President Obama and his henchman, David Seamus.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
You got that right.